The winter of 1886 came to Arizona like a curse. December winds howled across Oak Creek Canyon with a fury that made old-timers shake their heads and mutter prayers. Snow fell thick and relentless, blanketing the high country in a silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Elijah Brennan stood in the doorway of his cabin watching the last light drain from the western sky. 37 years old, 5 years alone, the kind of alone that settles into your bones and makes a home there. He was a tall man, lean in the way of those who forget to eat. His hands bore the scars of hard work and harder choices, dark hair streaked with premature gray, eyes the color of winter sky holding memories he couldn't speak aloud. The cabin was small, one room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table scarred by knife marks and coffee stains. Everything in its place, everything purposeful. No photographs on the walls, no letters tied with ribbon. Just the bare necessities of survival and one leather-bound Bible he never opened, left behind by a woman whose voice he could no longer remember clearly. Sarah. Her name was Sarah. She had died 3 years ago in the summer heat, coughing blood into white sheets while he held her hand and promised things he couldn't deliver. Consumption, the doctor said. Nothing to be done. Just wait. Just watch. Just bury what you love and learn to live with the hole it leaves behind. Before that, Eli had been someone else. A Texas Ranger with a badge and a purpose. A man who believed in law and order, in right and wrong, in the clean satisfaction of bringing bad men to justice. That belief died in the spring of 1881. He pushed the memory away as he did every night and turned back inside. The fire needed another log. Scout, his yellow dog, lay curled near the hearth muzzle on his paws, watching Eli with patient brown eyes. Outside the wind screamed. Inside the silence pressed down like a physical weight. Eli had learned to prefer the silence. Words were dangerous. Connection was dangerous. Love was the most dangerous thing of all, because when you lost it, and you always lost it, eventually the pain could break you in ways a bullet never would. He had exactly 3 months of supplies, enough to make it to March if he was careful. Then he would ride into Flagstaff trade, his furs buy what he needed, and return to this life of deliberate solitude. It was not happiness, but it was safe. He was reaching for the last log when Scout raised his head, ears forward, alert. Eli froze. His hand moved instinctively toward the Winchester rifle mounted above the door. In 5 years no one had come to this cabin. No travelers passed through this remote stretch of canyon. No neighbors existed within 10 miles. Scout growled, low and warning. Then came the sound, soft at first, almost lost in the wind. A knock, hesitant, human. Eli's heart kicked against his ribs. He took the rifle down, checked the load by muscle memory, and approached the door. Through the gaps in the wood he could see nothing but swirling snow and darkness. The knock came again, firmer this time, not threatening, determined. He opened the door 6 inches, rifle ready, and looked out into the storm. A woman stood there. Apache, he saw immediately. Her face was weathered but young, perhaps 31 years old. Dark hair hung wet and tangled around her shoulders. She wore a blanket wrapped tight against the cold, but he could see she was shivering. Her lips held a faint blue tinge. Behind her 3 children huddled together. A boy of maybe 11 stood in front, shoulders squared despite his obvious exhaustion. A girl around 8 clutched a handmade doll to her chest. The smallest child, a boy no more than 5, peered out from behind his mother with wide, frightened eyes. None of them were crying. That struck Eli harder than tears would have. They had been taught to be silent, taught that survival sometimes meant swallowing fear and presenting nothing to the world but dignity. The woman met his gaze without flinching. Her eyes were dark and direct, assessing, measuring him in the space of a heartbeat. When she spoke, her English was clear and careful, each word chosen with precision. "We need warmth. 3 hours. Then we go. We ask nothing else." Eli felt something crack inside his chest. Not breaking, thawing. For 5 years he had kept the world outside. For 5 years he had told himself that isolation was wisdom, that distance was protection, that the safest way to live was to need no one and be needed by no one. But standing in that doorway looking at 3 children who had learned not to cry even when they were freezing, he remembered something he thought he had forgotten. He remembered the man he used to be, before 1881, before the mistake that had haunted every day since. Without a word, Eli stepped back from the door. The firelight spilled out into the snow, warm and golden and impossibly inviting. "Come in," he said. The woman hesitated for only a moment. Then she ushered the children forward with gentle hands. They filed past Eli in silence, bringing with them the smell of wood smoke and winter and desperate miles. Scout stood and approached the smallest boy, sniffing cautiously. The child flinched back, pressing against his mother's leg. "He's friendly," Eli said quietly. He closed the door against the storm and set the rifle back in its place. His hands, he noticed, were shaking slightly. The family stood near the fire, not quite believing their luck. The children were painfully thin. The oldest boy's coat was too small for him. The girl's shoes were worn through at the toes. The little one Eli saw now had a fever flush on his cheeks and a glassy look in his eyes. The woman remained standing alert and watchful. She positioned herself between Eli and her children, ready, waiting to see what kind of man had opened his door. Eli moved to the small stove in the corner and put a kettle on to boil. He could feel their eyes following his every movement. "There's bread," he said, gesturing to the table. "Not fresh, but it's food. And dried meat. Help yourselves." The children looked to their mother. She studied Eli for another long moment, then gave a small nod. The oldest boy stepped forward first. He took the bread carefully, divided it into 4 pieces with his hands, and gave the largest portion to his mother. "No," she said softly in English. Then something in Apache. The boy hesitated, but she was firm. He kept the large piece and distributed the others. His mother got the smallest. Eli watched this exchange and felt that crack in his chest widen. When was the last time he had seen such tenderness, such careful love? He poured hot water into tin cups, added a pinch of precious tea leaves, and handed them out. The children cupped the warmth in their hands and breathed the steam. The little one with the fever drank too fast and coughed. His mother knelt beside him, murmuring comfort in Apache, one hand on his hot forehead. "How long has he been sick?" Eli asked. The woman looked up. 3 days. Fever comes and goes. I have medicine, but wet. Need dry." She opened a leather pouch at her waist and withdrew several bundles of herbs wrapped in cloth. They were indeed soaked through, useless until dried. Eli took them without asking and hung them near the fire, spacing them carefully so the heat could reach them without burning. The woman watched this with something like surprise in her eyes. "You know plants?" she asked. "My wife tried to learn," Eli said. The words felt strange in his mouth. He rarely spoke of Sarah. "Before the sickness took her. I am sorry. 3 years ago now." "Still," the woman said, "heart remembers." Eli nodded. He pulled the only chair in the cabin toward the fire. "Sit, please." She hesitated, then lowered herself onto the edge of the seat. The children settled on the floor around her like birds around a tree. For several minutes no one spoke. The fire crackled. The wind howled. Inside the cabin, warmth slowly returned to frozen limbs. The girl with the doll looked up at Eli shyly. She whispered something to her mother in Apache. The woman translated. "She asks why you help." Eli considered the question. There were many answers he could give. Because it was the right thing to do. Because they would die in the storm. Because no man worthy of the name could turn away a mother and her children. But what he said was simpler, more true. Because 5 years ago I made a mistake. Sent a man to hang. Apache man. He was innocent. The woman's face went very still. "You were lawman. Ranger. Texas Ranger. Not anymore." This man, what was his crime? Murder, they said. Evidence was clear. Knife with blood, witness testimony. I arrested him, brought him in, didn't ask enough questions, didn't look hard enough. Eli's hands tightened on his cup. 2 weeks after he hanged, we found the real killer. The children watched him with solemn eyes. The woman was quiet for a long time. Finally she said, "You did not know." "Should have. That's my point. Should have checked. Should have pushed harder. Should have trusted my gut instead of my orders." He met her gaze. "I've spent 5 years trying not to make the same mistake twice." The woman studied his face. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy something in her. The tension in her shoulders eased by a fraction. "My name is Nietzsche," she said. It was an offering, a bridge extended. "Daughter of Little Bird Medicine Woman. These are my children. Kaya, the oldest boy. Isti, the girl. Chato, the little one with fever. Eli Brennan. Where is your family, Eli Brennan?" "Gone. Wife to sickness. Never had children." Nietzsche nodded slowly. 5 days ago, my husband died. Taza. Good man. Strong man. Bullet took him while we ran." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that needed no embellishment. Eli understood loss. He understood the particular emptiness that comes from loving someone and then having to live in a world that no longer contains them. "I'm sorry," he said. "He told me once, if trouble comes, find the white man who lives alone in the canyon. He has eyes of someone who understands loss." She paused. "We met 2 summers ago. You gave him water, traded fairly for furs. He said you were different, lonely, but kind." Eli had a vague memory of that encounter. A quiet Apache man with intelligent eyes. They had not spoken much, just the necessary words of commerce. But Eli had sensed something in him. Honor, maybe. The kind of honor that transcended culture and language. And now that man was dead and his wife and children were here asking for warmth in the snow. "Who killed him?" Eli asked quietly. "Men who want us gone, who want our land. We have papers, legal papers from Treaty of 1872. But papers do not stop bullets." Before Eli could respond, Scout suddenly stood. His ears swiveled toward the door. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Nietzsche was on her feet instantly. Her hand moved to a knife at her belt, a small blade but held with competence. "They found us," she whispered. Eli moved to the window and peered through the gap between the shutters. The snow was heavy, but in the moonlight he could see shapes. 6, maybe 7 horses moving in a wide circle around the cabin. Practiced. Military. "How many?" Nietzsche asked. 7. "They will not leave, not without us." Kaya stood and positioned himself in front of his siblings. 11 years old and already understanding that protection meant putting your body between danger and those you loved. Eli felt something harden in his chest. Not fear, clarity. He had run from responsibility for 5 years, hidden from consequence, told himself that the safest way to live was to care about nothing and no one. But some choices don't let you stay neutral. Some moments demand you pick a side. He checked the Winchester. 47 rounds for the rifle, 18 rounds for the revolver. Enough if he was careful. A voice called from outside, loud enough to carry through the storm. "Brennan, I know you're in there. It's been a long time, soldier." Eli's blood went cold. He knew that voice. Had known it for years once upon a time when he wore a badge and believed in justice. Sheriff Marcus Thornton. Former sheriff now, Eli supposed. The man who had given him the evidence against that innocent Apache man. The man whose orders Eli had followed without question. The man who had made Eli complicit in murder. Nietzsche saw the recognition on his face. "You know him." "Yeah, he's the man who made me make that mistake." Eli's voice was flat, empty of everything except a cold building fury. Outside, Thornton continued, "We're not here for you. Just hand over the woman and her children. She's wanted for murder. There's a warrant. $500 reward." Naichi's face remained calm, but her knuckles were white on the knife handle. I killed no one. I believe you. He lies. Traitor attacked me. My husband defended. Man fell and hit head. Accident. But Thornton wants our land. Railroad coming through White Mountain territory. My family has claim. Last Apache holding out. He cannot buy it. So he makes me criminal. If I die, children cannot keep claim. Land goes to territory. He buys it, sells to railroad. Eli understood immediately. It was the same pattern, the same corruption. Evidence manufactured, justice perverted. Innocent people destroyed so powerful men could profit. And he had been part of it once. Unknowing, yes, but part of it nonetheless. Never again. He moved to the door but did not open it. Thornton, what's your real reason? I told you. Murder warrant. Try again. We both know how you work. I learned that lesson in '81. There was a pause. When Thornton spoke again, his voice had lost its false reasonableness. Careful, Brennan. You're interfering with business. Business. That's what you call it. The land is worth $50,000 to the railroad. The woman refuses to sell. Sometimes progress requires difficult choices. Difficult choices. Like planting evidence. Like lying to rangers. You were always too soft. Too worried about doing things the right way. The world doesn't work that way. The strong take what they want. The weak get swept aside. Eli felt Naichi move closer. Her children clustered behind her. Kaya held a piece of firewood like a weapon. Isti had tears on her cheeks but made no sound. Chato, feverish and exhausted, leaned against his mother's leg. This was his choice, his moment. He could open the door, hand them over, return to his safe, numb isolation, tell himself it wasn't his problem, wasn't his fight, wasn't his responsibility. Or he could remember the man he used to be, the man who believed that some things mattered more than safety. That honor meant something. That justice, real justice, was worth fighting for even when the odds were bad and the outcome uncertain. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory, something she had said once near the end when the fever made her speak truths that hurt to hear. Eli, you're a good man with a good heart. Don't let one mistake make you forget that. Don't let fear turn you into something you're not. He had not understood then, had not been able to hear it through his guilt and grief. But he understood now. He turned to Naichi, looked at her children, saw in their faces every child who had ever needed protection, every innocent who had ever been crushed by the powerful, every person who had ever stood alone against the world. They're not getting you, he said quietly. Not tonight. Not ever. Naichi's eyes widened. You cannot stop 7 men. Probably not. But I can make them wish they'd stayed home. Kaya stepped forward. I can shoot. Father taught me. Eli looked at the boy, saw determination and fear and courage all mixed together. 11 years old and ready to fight. Yeah, Eli said. I bet you can. He raised his voice toward the door. Marcus, you want them. You come through me. The silence that followed was profound. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Thornton's voice came back cold and final. Wrong choice, old friend. We'll burn you out at dawn. You got a few hours to think about it. Change your mind, send them out. Otherwise, everyone in that cabin dies. The sound of horses retreated, not far, just out of rifle range, waiting. Eli set the Winchester on the table and looked at the small group in his cabin. A woman who had lost everything but her dignity. 3 children who had learned to be brave when bravery was all they had left. We should prepare, Naichi said. Yeah, we should. And so they did. As the night deepened and the snow continued to fall, they moved furniture, checked ammunition, and made plans. Eli and Naichi worked side by side, their movements efficient and practiced. 2 people who understood survival. 2 people who had lost too much to lose any more. The children eventually fell asleep near the fire, Chato's fever breaking as the herbs dried, and Naichi brewed them into medicine. Scout lay among them, keeping watch. In the quiet hours before dawn, Eli found himself thinking about the strange turns life takes. 5 years of isolation, 5 years of running from connection. And in one night, everything had changed. He had opened his door to strangers. They had opened their hearts to him, and together they would face whatever came with the sunrise. The hours before dawn crawled by with the slowness of a bad dream. Eli stood at the window watching shadows move through the snow. Thornton's men had made camp 200 yards out just beyond rifle range. Smart, patient. The kind of patience that came from knowing they had all the advantages. 7 men against 2 adults and 3 children. 7 rifles against Eli's Winchester and whatever makeshift weapons they could gather. 7 men who got paid whether their targets lived or died, and dying was easier. The odds were not good. Nietzsche worked quietly in the corner, checking her children for the 100th time. Chato's fever had broken, thank God for small mercies. The boy slept deeply now, his breathing even and peaceful. Isti lay curled against her older brother, one hand still clutching her doll. Kaya's eyes were open, watching the adults with the solemn awareness of a child forced to grow up too fast. Scout paced the cabin, instincts telling him danger lurked outside. Every few minutes he would growl low in his throat, and Eli would place a calming hand on his head. Nietzsche approached the window where Eli stood. She moved like water, silent and fluid. Up close he could see the lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the tension in her jaw. But her hands were steady, her spine straight. "You should sleep," Eli said quietly. "So should you." "Can't. Need to watch." "Then I watch too." She studied the darkness beyond the window. "Tell me about this man, Thornton, how you know him." Eli was silent for a moment. The story sat heavy in his chest, a stone he had carried for 5 years without ever setting down. "Met him in 1880. I was 28, new to the Rangers. He was sheriff in a town called Copper Ridge. We worked together a few times. He seemed solid, by the book, the kind of lawman you could trust. But he was not. No, he was smart though, knew how to look like the hero while lining his pockets, knew how to use the law instead of serving it." Nietzsche nodded. She understood men like that. Every culture had them. Men who wore badges and spoke of justice while their hands dripped with blood and their pockets bulged with stolen gold. In 1881, a man was killed near Copper Ridge, miner named Samuel Dix, stabbed in the back, money stolen. Thornton said he had evidence, a knife with blood, a witness who saw an Apache man running from the scene. "The man you arrested. His name was Tlaco. He was 30 years old, had a wife, 2 daughters. He denied everything, said he was hunting miles away when the murder happened. But Thornton was convincing. Had all the pieces lined up neat and clean." Eli's voice went hard. "I believed him. Did my job. Brought Tlaco in. Testified at the trial. Watched him hang." The memory still burned. The way Tlaco had looked at him from the gallows. Not with hatred, with disappointment, as if to say, "I expected better from you." 2 weeks later, a drifter got drunk in a saloon, started bragging about killing a miner for his gold. Someone recognized the story. They brought him in. He confessed, showed them where he'd hidden the knife, the real knife, different from the one Thornton had used as evidence. Thornton planted it. Yeah. Turned out Samuel Dix had filed a claim on land near a copper deposit, valuable land. His family would inherit. But Thornton had already bought up the surrounding property. With Dix dead and no clear heir, he could contest the claim. He made a fortune when he sold it to a mining company 6 months later. Nietzsche was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something in Apache, low and bitter. "What does that mean?" "It means some men have sickness in their hearts. No medicine can cure it." "That's about right." They stood together in the darkness, 2 people who had learned the same hard lesson from different teachers. The world was not fair. Justice was not guaranteed. And sometimes the people sworn to protect you were the ones you needed protecting from. "Why you leave Rangers?" Nietzsche asked. "Because I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. If I could be fooled that badly, if I could send an innocent man to his death, then what good was I? What right did I have to wear a badge? You made mistake, but you did not know." That's what everyone said, the captain, the other Rangers, even Tlaco's wife when I went to her to apologize. She looked at me with those sad eyes and said, "You did not know." But that doesn't bring him back, does it? That doesn't unmake what I did. Nietzsche reached out and touched his arm. The gesture was brief, but it carried weight. Understanding. My husband told me once a man's worth is not measured by his mistakes. It is measured by what he does after. She paused. You hide for 5 years, run from guilt. But tonight you stand. You fight. Taza would respect that. Eli felt something loosen in his chest. Not forgiveness. He wasn't ready for that. But maybe the beginning of acceptance. Maybe the understanding that he couldn't change the past, but he could choose what happened next. A sound from outside interrupted his thoughts. Footsteps crunching through snow. Someone approaching the cabin. Eli grabbed the Winchester and moved to the door. Nietzsche pulled Kaya close and positioned herself between the noise and her sleeping children. The footsteps stopped. A voice called out, but it wasn't Thornton. This voice was older, rougher, with a hint of humor even in the tension. "Eli Brennan, you stubborn son of a gun. You in there, or did you finally freeze to death like a sensible person?" Eli's heart jumped. He knew that voice. Hadn't heard it in 5 years, but he knew it. "Doc," he called back, "unless you know another crazy old sawbones wandering around in a snowstorm, open up before my beard turns to icicles." Eli unbarred the door and pulled it open. Standing in the snow was Samuel Fletcher, looking exactly as Eli remembered him. 58 years old, with a wild gray beard and eyes that crinkled at the corners. He wore a heavy coat and carried a medical bag in one hand and a rifle in the other. "Doc Fletcher." Eli couldn't help but smile. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Saving your ungrateful hide, apparently." Doc stomped snow off his boots and came inside. He took in the scene with a quick, practiced glance. The Apache woman, the children, the defensive preparations. "Well, this is cozy. Mind telling me why there's 7 armed men camped outside planning to murder you at sunrise?" "It's complicated." "It always is with you." Doc set down his bag and extended a hand to Nietzsche. "Samuel Fletcher, ma'am. Friends call me Doc. I'm what passes for a physician in these parts, though my patients would probably dispute that." Nietzsche shook his hand cautiously. "Nietzsche. Pleasure. Now anyone here injured or sick? I saw the boy coughing in his sleep." "Fever," Nietzsche said. "But breaking now. I gave medicine." Doc moved to check Chato anyway, gentle hands examining the boy without waking him. "Good work. What did you use, willow bark? And sage, and yarrow for the cough?" "Smart. Your mother teach you?" "Yes, she was medicine woman." "Then she taught you well." Doc straightened and looked at Eli. "Now, suppose you tell me why I rode past 7 very unhappy-looking men who seemed mighty interested in this cabin." Eli explained. "Thornton, the false murder charge, the land grab, the hunt." Doc listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Eli finished, the old man let out a long breath. "Marcus Thornton. I heard he'd moved on from Copper Ridge. Didn't know he'd set up shop here." Doc rubbed his beard. "Man's got connections all the way to the territorial capital. Sheriff, judge, probably half the town council. You're not just fighting him, Eli. You're fighting the whole damn system he's built." "I know. And you're doing it anyway." "I am." Doc looked at him for a long moment, then he grinned. "About damn time you stopped hiding. I was starting to think you'd gone soft. You here to help or criticize?" "Both. I'm talented that way." Doc pulled out a flask and took a sip. "I got supplies in my wagon half a mile south. Food, ammunition, medical gear. Also got 3 sticks of dynamite left over from when I helped clear that mine shaft last year. Eli raised an eyebrow. Dynamite. Never know when you'll need to blow something up. It's good to be prepared. Nietzsche looked between them. You are friends. Were, Doc said, before this one decided to become a hermit. We served together in the Rangers back when we both had more hair and fewer regrets. He grew serious. Eli Brennan is the most stubborn, guilt-ridden, self-punishing man I've ever known. But he's also the best man I've ever known. When he stands for something, he doesn't bend, doesn't break. You're in good hands, ma'am. I am beginning to see this. Kaya had woken during the conversation. Now he spoke for the first time, his voice careful and formal. Sir, can you teach me to shoot better? I can hit targets. But men move different than targets. Doc looked at the boy with respect. How old are you, son? 11, sir. Old enough to learn, old enough to fight if you have to, though I hope it doesn't come to that. Doc glanced at Eli. We need a plan. Sitting here waiting to be burned out isn't one. Eli had been thinking the same thing. If we could get to your wagon, we could make a run for Flagstaff. It's only 12 miles. We could reach the marshal's office before Thornton catches us. Assuming the marshal isn't on Thornton's payroll, too, Doc pointed out. Tom Walker's straight. I know him. You thought Thornton was straight, too. That stung because it was true. But Eli remembered Walker from his Ranger days. The man had turned down bribes, stood up to powerful interests, done the job even when it was hard. If anyone could be trusted, it was him. It's our best shot, Eli said. Nietzsche shook her head. They have horses. We have wagon. They catch us. Not if we give them something else to chase. Doc's eyes gleamed with mischief. That dynamite I mentioned, we could set it off east of here. Big explosion, lots of smoke. They'd think you were trying to break out that direction. By the time they figured out it was a trick, you'd be halfway to Flagstaff. It was risky. Everything about this situation was risky. But it was better than sitting here waiting to burn. How long until sunrise? Eli asked. Doc checked his pocket watch. 2 hours, maybe less. Then we move now, before they expect it. They spent the next 20 minutes preparing. Doc left to retrieve his wagon and supplies, moving with surprising stealth for a man his age. Nietzsche packed what little they had, working efficiently in the darkness. She showed Eli how to carry Chato on his back, the boy still sleeping, wrapped in blankets. Isti clung to her mother's hand. Kaya carried the small pack of ammunition and food. Scout stuck close to Eli's side, sensing something important was happening. When Doc returned with the wagon, they moved fast. Eli carried Chato out first, settling him in the wagon bed. Nietzsche lifted Isti up, then climbed up herself. Kaya handed up the supplies and scrambled up last. Doc handed Eli the dynamite and a long fuse. You know how to use this. I've blown up a few things in my day. Good. Set it in that stand of trees east of the cabin. Give yourself 5 minutes of fuse. That should be enough time to get clear. Eli nodded and headed into the darkness. The snow had stopped, but the cold was brutal. His breath made white clouds in the air. Behind him, the cabin sat silent and still, a last refuge about to be abandoned. He found the trees Doc had indicated and set the dynamite carefully. His hands were numb with cold, making the work harder. But he'd been trained well. The fuse was set. 5 minutes. Maybe less if it burned faster than expected. He lit the fuse and ran. Behind him, the small flame traveled along the cord like a snake made of light. Eating distance, counting down. Eli reached the wagon and hauled himself up. Doc snapped the reins and the horses moved, pulling them west toward Flagstaff, away from the cabin, away from Thornton's men. They had gone perhaps 400 yards when the world exploded behind them. The dynamite went up with a roar that shook the ground. Trees splintered. Snow flew in all directions. A fireball rose into the pre-dawn sky, bright as a second sun. In the camp, 200 yards from the cabin, Eli heard shouting, confusion, then the sound of horses, men scrambling to respond to what they thought was a breakout attempt. Doc kept the wagon moving steadily west. Not too fast. Fast would make noise, draw attention. but steady and purposeful, putting distance between them and danger. Naiche held her children close. Isti had woken at the explosion but didn't cry, just pressed her face against her mother's shoulder and stayed quiet. Kaya watched behind them, one hand on the knife at his belt. They traveled for an hour in tense silence. The sky slowly lightened from black to gray to the pale blue of early morning. The snow-covered landscape stretched out in all directions, beautiful and merciless. Then Scout growled. Eli turned and looked back. In the distance, barely visible through the morning mist, he saw them. 3 riders, coming fast. "We've got company," he said quietly. Doc looked back and cursed. "That was faster than I hoped. They must have figured out the trick." "Can we outrun them?" "Not for long. Horses are faster than this wagon, especially in snow." Naiche checked her bow. She had 6 arrows. "How far to town?" 5 miles, Doc said. "Maybe 6. 5 miles, against mounted men who knew how to shoot." The odds had just gotten worse. Eli picked up the Winchester and checked the load. "When they get in range, I'll slow them down. You can't hit much from a moving wagon." "Don't need to hit them, just need to make them cautious." The riders were closing. 300 yards now, 250. Eli aimed carefully, compensating for the wagon's movement, the distance, the wind. He fired. The shot went wide, but not by much. It kicked up snow 10 feet to the left of the lead rider. The man flinched and pulled back on his reins. All 3 riders slowed suddenly, wary. "That bought us a minute," Doc said. "Maybe 2. Eli reloaded. "Then we use it." The chase continued. Every few hundred yards, Eli would fire another shot, never hitting, but always close enough to make them think twice. The riders stayed back, keeping distance, but they were still there, still following. Then one of the riders pulled ahead of the others. He raised his rifle and fired. The bullet hit the side of the wagon with a sharp crack. Isti screamed. Naiche pulled her down, covering both children with her body. Eli fired back. This time his shot was closer. The rider jerked his horse to the side, but there were 3 of them and only one of Eli, and they were getting bolder. Another shot. This one hit the seat near Doc's leg. The old man cursed but kept the horses moving. Naiche rose up with her bow. In one fluid motion she drew and released. The arrow flew true, hitting one of the horses in the flank. The animal screamed and reared. Its rider fought for control, dropping his rifle. "Nice shot," Eli said. "Father taught all children," Naiche replied. She knocked another arrow. The wounded horse was slowing its rider down, but the other 2 kept coming. One of them was close now, close enough that Eli could see his face. Young, maybe 25, grim determination in his eyes. The man raised his rifle again. Aimed more carefully this time. Eli aimed back. For a heartbeat they stared at each other down the length of their barrels. 2 men who had never met about to try to kill each other over a dispute that neither of them had started. Then a shot rang out. But it came from ahead, not behind. The young rider jerked in his saddle and clutched his shoulder. His rifle fell into the snow. He wheeled his horse around and retreated, the other rider following. Eli turned and looked forward. Standing in the middle of the road, rifle still raised, was a woman. Tall and broad-shouldered, with red hair tucked under a knitted cap. She wore a practical dress and had the stance of someone who knew how to use a weapon. Doc let out a whoop of relief. "Margaret O'Brien. God bless that stubborn Irish woman." The wagon pulled up beside her. She lowered her rifle and looked at them with sharp green eyes. "Samuel Fletcher, you old fool. I heard explosions and gunshots and figured you'd gotten yourself into trouble again." Her gaze moved to Eli, then to Naiche and the children. "And who might these folks be?" "Friends," Doc said. "Friends who need help." Margaret studied them for a moment. Then she nodded. "My boarding house is a quarter-mile ahead. Get them inside. I'll deal with anyone who follows." She said it with such casual confidence that Eli almost believed her, almost thought that one woman with a rifle could hold off Thornton's entire crew, but they didn't have better options. Doc got the wagon moving again. Behind them, the 2 riders had stopped at a safe distance watching Margaret. Apparently even hired guns thought twice about tangling with her. The boarding house appeared through the morning mist. 2 stories, solid wood construction smoke rising from the chimney. A sign above the door read, "O'Brien's," in painted letters. They pulled the wagon around back. Margaret followed, walking backward with her rifle ready, covering their retreat. Inside the building was warm and smelled of coffee and fresh bread. Nietzsche's children looked around with wide eyes, overwhelmed by the sudden safety. Margaret set her rifle by the door and looked them over. "You're all half frozen and scared to death. Sit. I'll get food and blankets." She moved with the efficiency of someone used to taking charge. Within minutes they were seated at a long table, hot coffee in their hands, bread and butter being passed around. Chato woke up and looked confused. Isti explained in whispers. Kaya ate mechanically, his eyes on the door. Margaret sat down across from Eli. "Now then, suppose someone tells me what in the name of St. Patrick is going on." Eli told her. The same story he'd told Doc, but with more details now. Thornton's corruption, the murdered husband, the children in danger. Margaret's face grew harder with each sentence. When Eli finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Bastard." Doc choked on his coffee. "Maggie." "Well, he is. Pardon my language, children, but there's no polite word for a man who'd murder a family for profit." She looked at Nietzsche. "Your mother was Little Bird." Nietzsche's eyes widened. "You knew her." "She saved my life 10 years ago. I was lost in the desert outside White River, dying of thirst. An Apache woman found me, gave me water, brought me to safety. Red hair," she said, "like sunset. That was me." Tears formed in Nietzsche's eyes. She told this story. Irish woman with kind eyes. She said, "Someday I repay kindness." I'd say that day is today. Margaret reached across the table and took Nietzsche's hand. "You're safe here. Anyone wants to hurt you, they go through me first." In that moment, Eli understood something important. They were not alone anymore. What had started with one man opening a door in the snow had grown into something larger. A community forming around a simple idea. That justice mattered, that protecting the innocent mattered, that standing up to corruption mattered even when it was dangerous. Doc raised his coffee cup. To stubborn friends and second chances. They drank. Outside, the sun rose fully over the mountains, painting the snow gold and pink. Somewhere in the distance, Thornton's men were regrouping, planning their next move. But in this moment, in this place, there was warmth and bread and hope. There was the beginning of something that might, with luck and courage, turn into victory. The marshal's office sat on the corner of Main Street and Pike, a squat building with iron bars on the windows and a faded star painted above the door. Tom Walker had been marshal of Flagstaff for 12 years, and in that time he had earned a reputation for being fair, methodical, and completely incorruptible. Which was why Eli hoped to God the man was in his office this early in the morning. Doc had gone ahead to scout, leaving Eli and Nietzsche with Margaret at the boarding house. The children were finally resting, bellies full, wrapped in warm blankets. Kaya had fought sleep as long as he could, determined to keep watch, but exhaustion had finally claimed him. Now Eli stood at Margaret's window, watching the street wake up. Shopkeepers opening their doors, a freight wagon rumbling past. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that somewhere out there 7 armed men were hunting a family for the crime of owning land. Nietzsche came to stand beside him. She had washed her face and changed into a clean dress Margaret had provided. Her hair was braided neat and practical, but her eyes were still shadowed with exhaustion and worry. "You think this marshal will help?" she asked. "I think he'll try. Tom Walker's as honest as they come." "Honest men can still be afraid." "True, but Walker's not the type to scare easy." Eli paused. "I served with him once years back. Bank robbery in Prescott. 3 armed men against the 2 of us. Walker never flinched, just did the job." Nietzsche nodded slowly. "And if he cannot help, if Thornton owns the law here too?" It was the question Eli had been avoiding. If Walker couldn't or wouldn't help, their options narrowed dramatically. Fort Verde was 40 miles north. They might make it, they might not. Then we figure something else out, he said. We don't quit. Why? Nietzsche turned to face him. You do not know us. We are not your family. You could have closed door, could have stayed safe. Why you risk everything? Eli thought about that. There were practical answers. Because it was right. Because he owed a debt to a man he'd wronged 5 years ago. Because he couldn't live with himself if he turned away. But the real answer was simpler and more complicated at the same time. Because I've spent 5 years trying to run from who I am, he said quietly. Trying to hide from the guilt and the memories and the fact that I made a mistake that cost an innocent man his life. I thought if I stayed alone, if I needed nobody and let nobody need me, I could somehow make up for what I'd done. Or at least stop making things worse. He looked at her. But last night when you knocked on that door, I remembered something. Being alone doesn't make you safe. It just makes you alone. And there are worse things than getting hurt, like becoming the kind of man who can turn away when someone needs help. Nietzsche studied his face for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his cheek, a brief gesture that carried more weight than words. Taza would have liked you very much, she said softly. Before Eli could respond, Doc came hurrying up the street. His face was grim. Margaret let him in through the back door. Well? Walker's in his office. He'll see you. But there's a problem. Doc looked at Eli. Thornton's in town. Got here an hour ago with all his men. They're at the saloon making noise about fugitives and rewards and the sanctity of the law. Half the town's eating it up. Eli felt his jaw tighten. He's poisoning the well before we can even tell our side. Exactly. And it gets worse. He's got paper, an actual warrant signed by a territorial judge, for Nietzsche's arrest on charges of murder. Nietzsche went very still. The judge is bought. Probably. But it doesn't matter. A warrant is a warrant. Walker can't just ignore it. Margaret slammed her hand on the table. So we're supposed to just hand her over to that snake? I didn't say that. I said it's complicated. Doc rubbed his beard. Walker said he'll hear both sides before making any decisions. But if that warrant's legal, he's got limited options. Eli paced the room thinking. What if we could prove the warrant's based on false charges? What if we had a witness who saw what really happened? You have such a witness? Doc asked. Nietzsche shook her head. Only people there were me, Taza the trader, and one other man, Thomas Gray. He trades with Apache, brings supplies to reservation. He saw everything. Saw trader attack me. Saw Taza defend. Saw man fall and hit head. Where is this Thomas Gray now? I do not know. He was afraid. Said Thornton would kill him if he spoke. He ran. Smart man, Doc muttered. Cowardly, but smart. Margaret poured more coffee. So we need to find him. Make him testify. How hard could that be? In a territory this size, with Thornton's men looking for him too? Doc shook his head. We'd have better luck finding a specific snowflake in a blizzard. They sat in frustrated silence. So close to help, but still so far. A marshal who might want to do the right thing but whose hands were tied by legal process. A witness who could clear Nietzsche's name but who was too frightened to come forward. Then Kaya appeared in the doorway. The boy had been sleeping, but he was awake now, listening. I know where Thomas Gray is, he said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. You know where he is? Eli asked. How? Before Father died, he told me. Secret place. Where friends go when they need to hide. Old copper mine 3 miles north of White River. Abandoned, but dry. Safe. Nietzsche stood and went to her son. Taza told you this. Yes, he said if bad things happen, if we need help, go to Thomas. He will remember the kindness of our family. He will not let us face trouble alone. That's all well and good, Doc said. But White River is 20 miles from here. By the time we get there, find Gray and bring him back, Thornton could have already convinced the whole town that Nietzsche is guilty. Then someone needs to go now, Margaret said. Fast horse, light rider. I'll go, Eli said. No. Nietzsche's voice was firm. You need to stay. Talk to Marshall. Keep children safe. I will go. You're the one they're hunting, Eli protested, which is why they will not expect me to ride toward White River. They think I run from that direction, not toward it. She had a point. It was the kind of crazy logic that might actually work. I'll go with her, Margaret said. 2 riders are safer than 1, and I know the country around White River. Doc sighed. This is a terrible idea. You have a better one, Margaret challenged. No, which is why I hate it. He looked at Eli. You're going to see Walker. Soon as the office opens proper, if I show up too early it'll look like I'm sneaking around. Take the children with you. Let Walker see what he's being asked to hand over to Thornton. Might make a difference. It was good advice. People could dismiss ideas. They couldn't dismiss 3 scared children standing in front of them. The next hour passed in careful preparation. Margaret saddled 2 horses and packed supplies. Nietzsche spoke with her children, explaining in a mixture of English and Apache that she had to leave for a short time, but she would be back. Kaya tried to be brave. Isti cried but nodded. Chato, still not fully understanding, just held tight to his mother's hand. You come back, he said in his small voice. Always, Nietzsche promised. Have I ever broken promise to you? No. Then believe me now. She kissed his forehead, then Isti's, then Kaya's. Be good. Listen to Eli. He will keep you safe. Kaya straightened. We will be ready when you return. The women left through the back door just as the sun cleared the mountains. 2 riders heading north, moving at a steady pace that wouldn't attract attention but would cover ground. Eli watched them go with a tight feeling in his chest. Nietzsche had become more than just a woman he was helping. She had become something else. What exactly he wasn't ready to name, but the thought of her riding into danger made him want to saddle a horse and follow. Doc seemed to read his thoughts. She's tougher than she looks. I know. And Margaret can outshoot most men I know. I know that too. Then stop looking like a man watching his wife ride to war. Eli shot him a look. She's not my wife. Didn't say she was. Said you're looking at her like she is. There's a difference. Doc grinned. For a hermit, you sure picked a complicated way to rejoin society. Despite everything, Eli almost smiled. Shut up, Doc. Never. It's one of my best qualities. At 9 o'clock, Eli and the children walked to the marshal's office. People stared. An Apache woman and her children were unusual enough in Flagstaff. An Apache woman and her children walking with a white man drew outright attention. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion. A few showed something that might have been sympathy. The marshal's office door was open. Tom Walker sat at his desk, papers spread in front of him. He was 48 years old with iron-gray hair and a face weathered by sun and hard decisions. When he saw Eli, he stood. Brennan, heard you were back among the living. More or less? Eli shook his hand. The grip was firm, honest. These are Nietzsche's children. Kaya Isti Chato. Walker looked at them, his expression unreadable. Ma'am said you'd be bringing them. Come in. Sit. They arranged themselves in the small office. The children stayed close to Eli Chato, holding his hand. Walker poured water into tin cups and passed them around. Small courtesies, but they mattered. Thornton says the woman murdered James Hutchins. Walker began without preamble. Says there's a warrant. Says she's dangerous. Thornton's lying, Eli said flatly. James Hutchins attacked Nietzsche. Her husband defended her. Hutchins fell and hit his head. It was an accident. Self-defense at worst. You were there. No, but I believe her. Based on what? Based on the fact that Thornton's done this before. 5 years ago he planted evidence to frame an Apache man named Talaco. I arrested that man. He hanged. 2 weeks later the real killer confessed. Walker's face went still. You're saying a territorial sheriff manufactured evidence? I'm saying Marcus Thornton will do anything to get what he wants. Right now he wants Nietzsche's land. Her family has legal claim to property near White Mountain. Railroad wants to buy it. She won't sell. So he's removing her the only way he can. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Walker was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I've heard rumors about Thornton, nothing concrete, nothing I could act on, but rumors. Then help me make them concrete. Give us time to bring in a witness, man named Thomas Gray. He saw what happened. He can testify that it was self-defense. Where is this Gray? We're working on that. Walker leaned back in his chair. Eli, even if I believe you, and I'm inclined to, I've got a legal warrant. Judge Marcus Whitfield signed it himself. I can't just ignore that. Can you hold off executing it 24 hours? Give us time to find Gray and get his testimony. Thornton won't wait 24 hours. He's already stirring up the town, talking about law and order, about dangerous fugitives. People are listening. Then let them hear our side too. Eli leaned forward. Tom, look at these children. Really look at them. Does this look like a family of dangerous criminals to you? Walker's gaze moved to Kaya, sitting straight-backed and serious, to Isti, clutching her doll, to Chato, who had dozed off against Eli's shoulder. Something in the marshal's expression softened. No, he said quietly. It doesn't. Then give us a chance. Just a chance. Walker was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. 24 hours. I'll keep Naichi in protective custody, not arrest. That'll keep Thornton at bay temporarily. But if Gray doesn't show up, or if a federal marshal arrives and overrules me, I'll have no choice. Understood. They shook hands again. As Eli stood to leave, Walker said, Brennan, for what it's worth, I'm glad you came back. We could use more men willing to stand up when it costs them something. Eli nodded and left the office. Outside, the street was busier now, and standing in front of the saloon watching with cold eyes was Marcus Thornton. The two men stared at each other across 50 yards of dusty street. Thornton smiled. It was not a friendly expression. He raised his hand in a mocking salute. Then he turned and went back inside. Eli felt Kaya tense beside him. That is him, the man who killed father, one of them. I want to hurt him. Eli looked down at the boy, saw anger and grief and helpless rage all mixed together. He knew that feeling, had lived with it for 5 years. I know, he said quietly, but hurting him won't bring your father back, won't make anything better. You know what will make things better. What? Proving he's wrong. Proving he can't win just because he's got money and guns. Proving that justice matters more than power. Eli squeezed the boy's shoulder. Your father fought so you could live. Best way to honor him is to live well. Live free. Be the kind of man he'd be proud of. Kaya was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Yes, you are right. They walked back to Margaret's boarding house. Doc was waiting with news. Word's spreading, he said. Some folks are sympathetic, others are scared. Thornton's offering $500 to anyone who brings in Naichi. That's more money than most people see in a year. Anyone taking him up on it? Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. Eli looked out the window at the town, at the people going about their business. Normal folks with families and dreams and fears. People who wanted to do right but also wanted to stay safe. He understood that. He'd been one of them once. Maybe he still was. But somewhere between opening his door in the snow and walking into this marshal's office with 3 children at his side, something had changed. He'd stopped asking whether it was safe to do the right thing. He'd started asking whether he could live with himself if he didn't. And the answer was no. He couldn't. Then we wait, he said, and we hope Naichi and Margaret find Thomas Gray before Thornton finds them. Doc poured whiskey into 2 glasses and handed one to Eli. To hope. May it be enough. They drank. Outside, clouds gathered over the mountains. Another storm was coming, and with it, one way or another, an ending. The children sat by the fire pretending not to be afraid. Chato asked when his mother would return. Isti held her doll and sang a quiet song in Apache. Kaya sharpened a knife with methodical precision, and Eli watched the street waiting for riders who might bring salvation or might bring death. Either way, they would face it together. That was something. In a world of uncertainty and danger and corruption, that was something real and true and worth holding on to. They were not alone anymore. And that made all the difference. The storm arrived at noon, sweeping down from the mountains with a vengeance that turned the sky black and the air thick with snow. Eli stood at the window of Margaret's boarding house, watching the street empty as people hurried indoors. The wind howled around the corners of buildings, rattling shutters and stealing hats from careless heads. Nietzsche and Margaret had been gone for 3 hours. In good weather they could reach White River in 4, but this storm would slow them. Add another hour, maybe 2, if they made it at all. "Stop worrying," Doc said from his chair near the fire. "Margaret knows every trail between here and the New Mexico border. She'll get them through." "That's not what I'm worried about." "Then what?" Eli turned from the window. "Thornton's not stupid. He'll figure out we're looking for Gray. Might have already figured it out. If he sends men north, then Nietzsche and Margaret will have to deal with it." Doc stood and stretched. "You can't protect everyone from everything, Eli. Sometimes you have to trust people to take care of themselves." It was good advice. Eli just wished he could follow it. Kaya sat at the table teaching Isti how to play a card game their father had taught them. The boy's face was serious, focused, but every few minutes his eyes would drift to the door, hoping to see his mother walk through it. Chato had fallen asleep again, curled up on a bench with Scout lying beside him. The dog's presence seemed to comfort the child. Every time Chato stirred, Scout would lift his head and nose the boy gently. A knock at the door made everyone freeze. Eli's hand went to his revolver. Doc picked up his rifle. Kaya pushed Isti behind him and reached for his knife. "It's me," came a voice from outside. "Walker." Eli opened the door. The marshal stood there, snow gathering on his hat and shoulders. His face was grim. "We need to talk. Not here. My office." "What happened?" "Thornton happened. He's calling for a town meeting. Tonight. Says the people have a right to decide whether they want a fugitive hiding in their midst." Walker's jaw was tight. "He's good, Eli. Real good. He's got half the town convinced that harboring Nietzsche is inviting Apache revenge. Got the other half convinced that turning her over is just following the law. So he's forcing your hand. Not just mine, the whole town's. If they vote to turn her over, I won't have a choice." Doc swore under his breath. "Democracy's a beautiful thing until the mob gets its say." "When's this meeting?" Eli asked. 7 o'clock. Town Hall." Walker looked at the children. "I'd keep them out of sight. Some folks are already talking about taking matters into their own hands." After Walker left, Eli and Doc discussed their options. They were running out of time and running out of moves. Without Thomas Gray's testimony, they had nothing but their word against Thornton's legal warrant. "Maybe we should just run," Doc suggested. "Load up the wagon head for Fort Verde. Federal authorities there won't be in Thornton's pocket." "And how far do you think we'd get in this storm with children and an old wagon?" Eli shook his head. "We'd freeze or get caught, probably both. So what do? We go to the meeting, we tell the truth, we make them see. Make them see what? That they should risk Thornton's wrath for people they don't know, people who aren't even white." Doc's voice was bitter. "I've been around long enough to know how these things go, Eli. Fear and prejudice beat truth 9 times out of 10. Then we make this the 10th time." The afternoon dragged by with agonizing slowness. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Snow piled in drifts against buildings. The street became a white river, unmarked by footprints or wagon tracks. Kaya kept watch at the window, his young face tight with worry. "She will come back," Isti said softly. "Mama always comes back." "I know." But Kaya's voice held doubt. Eli sat down beside them. "Your mother is the strongest person I've ever met. And Margaret O'Brien is tougher than leather and meaner than a cornered badger. They'll be fine. You promise?" Eli wanted to give them the comfort of certainty, but he'd learned the hard way that some promises couldn't be kept. "I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you safe," he said instead. "And I promise your mother is doing the same. That's all any of us can do." Kaya thought about this, then nodded. "That is enough." At 6:30 they made their way to the town hall. The storm had eased slightly enough that people could navigate the streets. A crowd was already gathering, stamping snow from their boots and talking in low voices. Eli kept the children close. He saw people staring, saw conversations stop as they passed. Some faces showed sympathy, others showed suspicion or outright hostility. The town hall was a large wooden building with a potbelly stove at one end and rows of benches facing a raised platform. By the time they arrived, nearly 100 people had crowded inside. The air was thick with the smell of wet wool and tobacco smoke. Thornton stood near the platform surrounded by his men. He saw Eli enter and smiled that cold, predatory smile. Marshal Walker stood on the platform looking uncomfortable. Beside him was the mayor, a round-faced man named Harrison Webb, who owned the general store and had a reputation for avoiding trouble whenever possible. Mayor Webb called the meeting to order by ringing a handbell. The crowd quieted. "Thank you all for coming out in this weather," Webb began. "We're here to discuss a matter of some importance. As you know, there's an Apache woman currently under Marshal Walker's protection. She's accused of murder. There's a legal warrant for her arrest, but there are also questions about the circumstances." "No questions at all," Thornton called out. "She killed James Hutchins. There were witnesses. There's a warrant signed by a territorial judge. The law is clear." "The law was also clear when you framed Talico," Eli said loudly. The crowd murmured. Heads turned. Thornton's face darkened. "That's a serious accusation, Brennan, and completely false. Talico was tried by a jury and found guilty. Based on evidence you planted, I know. I was the one who arrested him." Eli stepped forward, the children following. "I believed you then. I was wrong. I won't make that mistake again." "You were always soft," Thornton said. "Always too worried about doing things the right way to see what needed to be done. That's why you're standing in front of us defending a savage who murdered a white man, while I'm standing here defending civilization." The word savage hit the room like a slap. Eli felt Kaya tense beside him. "She has a name," Eli said quietly. "Naichi. And these are her children. Kaya, Isti, Chato. They're not savages. They're not criminals. They're a family who lost their father and are being hunted by a man who wants to steal their land." "That's a lie," Thornton said. "Is it? Then why don't you tell everyone about the railroad contract, about the $50,000 you stand to make if you can clear the White Mountain property?" Thornton's face went red. "Business dealings have nothing to do with this." "They have everything to do with it. You can't buy the land legally because Naichi's family has treaty rights, so you're removing her the only way you can, by making her a criminal." The crowd was listening now, really listening. Eli pressed his advantage. 5 years ago, Thornton did the same thing to a man named Talico. Planted evidence, manufactured witnesses, got him hanged. Why? So Thornton could buy his family's land and sell it to a mining company. He made a fortune, and an innocent man died. "Prove it," Thornton snarled. "I am proving it, right now, by showing you the pattern, by asking you to look at who benefits from Naichi's death." A voice from the crowd spoke up. It was Henry Wu, the Chinese shopkeeper. "I have known prejudice. I have seen how easy it is to blame outsiders for crimes they did not commit. Perhaps we should hear all sides before deciding." Another voice, Clara Whitmore, the schoolteacher. "These children deserve protection under the law, same as any white children. Their mother deserves a fair hearing." But there were other voices too, angry voices. "She's Apache. They killed my brother in a raid 5 years ago. We let one in, they'll think they can all come. The law says she's a murderer. Who are we to question that?" Mayor Webb rang his bell again, trying to restore order. "Please, everyone, let's be civil." Thornton seized the moment. "The good people of Flagstaff have a choice. Do we follow the law even when it's hard? Or do we let our sympathy cloud our judgment? I say we follow the law. I say we turn over the fugitive to proper authorities. Let a judge decide her fate. She won't make it to a judge, Eli said flatly. You'll kill her on the road and call it resisting arrest. More lies. Are they? Tell everyone here, Thornton. Tell them what you told me outside my cabin, about removing obstacles, about progress requiring difficult choices. Thornton's eyes went cold. Be very careful, Brennan. You're making enemies. I've had worse. The door at the back of the hall burst open. Snow and wind swirled in along with two figures, Margaret and Nietzsche, covered in snow, exhausted but alive. And between them, supported by both women, was Thomas Gray. The room went silent. Gray was a thin man in his 40s with weathered features and frightened eyes. He looked around at the crowd like a rabbit surrounded by wolves. Thomas Gray, Marshal Walker said, stepping forward, you're the witness. Gray nodded. His voice was hoarse. I was there. I saw what happened. Then tell us, Walker said. The truth, all of it. Gray swallowed hard. I've been trading with the Apache for 10 years, bringing supplies to the reservation, making a living. James Hutchins, he ran a trading post too, competed with me. He paused, gathering courage. 3 weeks ago, Nietzsche came to Hutchins' post, needed medicine for her children. Hutchins, he'd been drinking. He grabbed her, tried to force himself on her. She fought. He hit her. The crowd was utterly silent now. Taza, her husband, he came in, saw what was happening. He pulled Hutchins off. They fought. Hutchins fell backward, hit his head on the corner of a table, started bleeding. We tried to help him, but... Gray's voice broke. He died an hour later. Why didn't you report this? Someone called out. Because Thornton came by the next day, said he'd seen the whole thing different, said Nietzsche attacked Hutchins, said Taza murdered him in cold blood, said if I testified different I'd be next. Gray looked at Thornton. He gave me money, told me to disappear, told me to keep quiet or my wife would be a widow. Thornton stood very still. His hand moved toward his gun. I wouldn't, Marshal Walker said quietly, his own weapon drawn and pointed. Not in a room full of witnesses. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the wind outside and the crackling of the stove. Then Thornton lowered his hand, but his eyes promised violence later. That man is lying, he said, paid by Brennan to say whatever he wants. Am I lying about this? Gray pulled a folded paper from his coat. His hands shook as he handed it to Walker. Letter from Thornton, offering me $500 to leave the territory, threatening my family if I talked. I kept it. Insurance. Walker read the letter. His face grew hard. This is your handwriting, Thornton. Could be forged. Could be, but I doubt it. Walker looked at the crowd. I've heard enough. Thomas Gray's testimony casts serious doubt on the charges against Nietzsche. Combined with Brennan's testimony about Thornton's past actions, I'm declaring the warrant invalid pending a full investigation. You don't have that authority, Thornton said. In my town, I do. You got a problem with it, take it up with the territorial governor. Walker turned to the crowd. Now you all have a choice. You can believe that this woman and her children are dangerous criminals, or you can believe that they're victims of a man willing to do anything for money. What's it going to be? The silence stretched. Then Henry Wu stood. I stand with the family. Clara Whitmore stood. As do I. Reverend Stone stood. God commands us to protect the widow and the orphan. I stand with them. One by one people stood. Not everyone. Maybe half the room. But it was enough. Thornton looked around at the standing crowd. His face was a mask of rage barely contained. This isn't over, he said softly. Then louder to his men. We're leaving. They filed out into the storm. The door slammed behind them. The remaining crowd erupted in conversation, some angry, some relieved, some just confused. Nietzsche stood in the center of it all, her children running to embrace her. She held them tight, tears streaming down her face. Eli watched from a distance, feeling something tight in his chest finally loosen. They'd won. Not completely, not permanently, but for now, they'd won. Margaret came to stand beside him. "That was closer than I'd like. How'd you find Gray?" "Right where the boy said he'd be. Took some convincing, but Nietzsche can be very persuasive." She smiled. "Also helped that I promised to shoot Thornton myself if he tried anything." "Think you'll have to make good on that?" "Probably. Man like that doesn't take losing well." Doc joined them, flask in hand. Two unlikely victories and stubborn friends. They drank. Around them people were coming up to Nietzsche, offering help, offering shelter, offering friendship. Not everyone, but enough. Marshal Walker approached Eli. "You should know Thornton's going to come at you hard now. You made him look like a fool in front of the whole town. Men like him don't forgive that. Let him come." "I'm serious, Eli. He's got money connections and no conscience. You're going to need to watch your back." "I've been watching my back for 5 years. Time to start watching forward instead." Walker nodded slowly. "Yeah, I suppose it is." He paused. "You did good tonight. Sarah would have been proud." The mention of his wife's name hit Eli harder than expected, but it didn't hurt the way it used to. It felt more like a blessing, a reminder that love, even love that ends, leaves something behind, something good. "Thanks, Tom." As the crowd dispersed into the snowy night, Eli found himself standing next to Nietzsche. Her children were with Margaret, being fed hot soup and wrapped in warm blankets. "Thank you," Nietzsche said quietly, "for everything." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. You opened your door. You stood with us. You risked your life." She looked at him with those dark, direct eyes. "Why?" Eli thought about how to answer, about redemption and guilt and the need to be someone he could respect in the mirror. But what he said was simpler. Because it was right, and because somewhere along the way you stopped being strangers. You became— He paused, searching for the word. "Family." Nietzsche smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, made her look younger, lighter. "Yes," she said. "Family." Outside, the storm was ending. The clouds broke apart, revealing stars like scattered diamonds on black velvet. The world was white and clean and new, and for the first time in 5 years, Elijah Brennan felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. The morning after the town meeting dawned clear and cold, the kind of cold that made the snow squeak under your boots and turned breath into clouds of white vapor. Eli stood on the porch of Margaret's boarding house, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and pink. He hadn't slept. None of them had, really. They'd taken shifts through the night, watching for Thornton's inevitable retaliation. But the hours had passed quietly. Too quietly. That worried Eli more than an attack would have. Marcus Thornton was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. Inside, the smell of coffee and frying bacon drew him back. Margaret was at the stove cooking enough food for a small army. Nietzsche helped, moving comfortably in the kitchen despite never having been there before. The two women had formed a bond during their ride to find Thomas Gray, the kind of bond that came from shared danger and shared purpose. The children sat at the long table. Chato was fully recovered. Now, his fever gone, his energy returned. He was showing Isti how to make a cat's cradle with string, their fingers moving in practiced patterns. Kaya sat apart, cleaning Eli's rifle with careful attention to detail. The boy had asked permission first, and Eli had taught him the proper way. It seemed important to give the child something useful to do, some way to feel he was contributing. Doc Fletcher came down the stairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Anyone get murdered in the night?" "Not yet," Eli said. "Give it time. Day's still young." Marshal Walker arrived an hour later. His face was grim. "Thornton left town before dawn, took his men and headed west." West. That didn't make sense. Nietzsche's land was north and east. "Where's he going?" That's what worries me. He's up to something. Walker accepted a cup of coffee from Margaret. I sent a wire to the territorial governor's office. Told them everything. About the fake warrant, about Gray's testimony, about Thornton's history. But it'll be days before I hear back. And in the meantime, we wait. And we watch. Waiting was harder than fighting. Eli had learned that in the Rangers. The anticipation of violence was often worse than the violence itself. Your mind conjured every possible disaster, played out every nightmare scenario. By noon, the tension in the boarding house was thick enough to cut with a knife. The children felt it. They played quietly without their usual energy. Even Scout seemed subdued, lying near the door with his ears swiveling at every sound from outside. Then Henry Wu arrived, breathless and agitated. "Fire," he gasped. "At the reservation. Someone set fire to the Apache settlement north of White River. 3 families lost their homes, 1 child badly burned." Naichi went white. "Which families?" "I do not know all names, but I heard the family of Joseph Running Bear was hit." Joseph Running Bear, the Apache elder who had come to testify on Naichi's behalf, the man who had brought the treaty papers proving her family's land claim. This was no coincidence. "Thornton," Eli said flatly. "Has to be." Doc agreed. "Sending a message. Cross me and everyone you love pays." Naichi stood so fast her chair tipped over. "I have to go to them. They need medicine. They need help." "That's what he wants," Walker said. "He's trying to draw you out, get you away from protection." "I do not care what he wants. My people are hurt." "Then I'll go with you," Eli said. "And me," Margaret added. "And me," Doc said. "Someone's got to patch up the wounded." Walker looked at them like they were insane. "You're walking into a trap." "Probably," Eli acknowledged. "But what choice do we have? We can't let innocent people suffer because we're afraid." "That's not fear. That's common sense." "Common sense would have kept me hiding in my cabin, would have kept me from opening the door that night. Sometimes you have to do the stupid thing because it's the right thing." Walker was silent for a moment. Then he swore under his breath. "Fine, but I'm coming too. And I'm deputizing anyone else who wants to help. Make this official." In the end, 6 adults made the journey north. Eli Naichi, Doc Margaret Walker, and Henry Wu, who insisted that someone needed to represent the town's merchants. "Cannot let Thornton think he speaks for all of us," he'd said firmly. They left the children with Clara Whitmore and Reverend Stone under guard. Kaya had protested wanting to come, but Naichi had been firm. "You are brave, my son, but you are also 11 years old. Your job is to protect your brother and sister. That is most important." The ride to White River took 3 hours through snow that alternated between crusty and soft, making the horses work for every mile. They saw no one on the trail, no travelers, no riders. Just empty white wilderness and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. The smell hit them before they reached the settlement. Smoke. Not the clean smoke of cooking fires, but the acrid stench of burned wood and canvas and belongings that had taken years to accumulate. 3 shelters had been completely destroyed. 2 more were damaged. A dozen Apache families stood in the cold, wrapped in whatever blankets they'd managed to save, looking at the ruins of their homes with hollow eyes. Joseph Running Bear sat on a log, his arm wrapped in crude bandages. Burns covered his hands, but he stood when he saw them approach. "Naiche, you should not have come." "How could I not?" She slid from her horse and went to him. "Who did this?" "White men came in the night, poured oil on our homes, set fires. We tried to fight, but—" He gestured at the destruction. "They had guns. We had only water buckets." Doc was already moving among the injured, his medical bag open. A child lay on a blanket, her face and arms burned. Her mother sat beside her, singing softly in Apache. Doc knelt and began examining the wounds, his movements gentle despite his gruff manner. Margaret and Henry started distributing supplies. Food, blankets, medicine. Not enough. Never enough. But something. Eli stood apart watching the forest line. Something felt wrong. The attack had been too easy, too quick. Thornton's men should still be here guarding their handiwork, making sure the message was received, unless they'd never left. Unless this was, as Walker had said, a trap. He was reaching for his rifle when the first shot rang out. The bullet kicked up snow at Eli's feet. He dove behind a burned-out shelter rifle coming up. Around him, everyone scattered. Marshal Walker drew his weapon. Margaret grabbed Henry and pulled him to cover. Then they came. 7 riders emerging from the tree line, guns drawn. Thornton at the lead, his face twisted with rage and satisfaction. "Brennan," he called, "you should have stayed out of this. Should have kept your nose in your own business." Eli didn't waste breath on a reply. He aimed carefully and fired. The shot went wide, but it made Thornton's horse shy. The other riders spread out, seeking cover. Doc had stayed with the burned child, his body shielding hers. The child's mother covered them both. Around them, Apache men were grabbing what weapons they had. A few old rifles, bows and arrows, not enough to fight 7 armed men, but enough to try. Nietzsche had her bow out, an arrow knocked. She moved like water, finding a position behind a pile of rocks, her movements economical and precise. Marshal Walker called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Marcus Thornton, you're under arrest for arson, assault, and conspiracy to commit murder. Drop your weapons." Thornton laughed. "Arrest me, you and what Army Walker?" "Me and these people. And the territorial governor once he hears about this." "The governor's a week away. A lot can happen in a week." One of Thornton's men, a young gunfighter named Cole, fired at Walker. The marshal ducked, but not quite fast enough. The bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard. Margaret returned fire. Her shot hit Cole's horse, sending beast and rider tumbling. Cole scrambled to his feet, cursing his rifle lost in the snow. The fight erupted in earnest then, shots cracking in the cold air, arrows hissing through space, men shouting, horses screaming. Eli fired methodically, making each shot count. He hit one of Thornton's men in the leg, sent another diving for cover. But there were too many of them, and they had better positions. An arrow flew past his head so close he felt the wind of its passage, but it wasn't aimed at him. Nietzsche's arrow took one of the gunmen in the shoulder, her aim true and deadly. Joseph Running Bear, despite his burns, had found an old rifle. He fired with steady hands, driving back 2 men who'd been trying to flank their position, but they were still outnumbered and outgunned. This was going to end badly. Then Eli heard something, a sound that didn't belong. Hoofbeats, many of them, coming fast from the south. Thornton heard it too. His head turned, his confident smile faltering. Into the clearing rode 20 men. Some were townspeople from Flagstaff. Eli recognized faces from the town meeting. Others were Apache from neighboring settlements. And at the front, carrying a rifle and wearing a makeshift deputy's badge, was Billy Crane, the young man who'd tried to sneak into Eli's cabin that first night, the one they'd let go, the one Eli had told there was a better way to help his sick mother. Billy had brought help. "Drop your weapons," Billy called out. His voice shook, but his rifle was steady. "It's over, Thornton." Thornton looked at the 20 guns pointed at him, looked at his 6 remaining men, 2 of them wounded. Did the math. "You're making a mistake, boy." "No, sir. I'm fixing one." For a long moment everything balanced on a knife's edge. Thornton's hand moved toward his gun. Eli's finger tightened on his trigger. 20 rifles tracked Thornton's movement. Then Marshal Walker, blood soaking his shoulder, stood up. "Marcus, don't." It was the voice of authority, of law, of a man who had seen too much violence and didn't want to see more. Thornton's hand stopped. His shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him all at once, replaced by the cold realization of a man who'd gambled everything and lost. "Drop it," Walker said quietly. Thornton's gun fell into the snow. One by one his men did the same. Hands up. Fight over. Billy and the others moved in to secure them. Townspeople and Apache working together, binding hands, confiscating weapons. The reversal was complete. Doc was still working on the burned child. Naichi had gone to help him, her medicine knowledge proving invaluable. Margaret was bandaging Walker's shoulder, muttering Irish curses about stubborn men who didn't know when to duck. Eli approached Thornton. The older man looked at him with hatred that could melt steel. "You've destroyed me," Thornton said flatly. "No, you destroyed yourself. I just stopped letting you destroy everyone else." "For what?" "For some Apache woman and her brats. For people who don't matter. They matter to me." Eli's voice was quiet but firm. "They mattered to Talako, the man you framed. They matter to every person you've hurt to line your pockets. And that's where you and I are different. You see people as obstacles or tools. I see them as people. That's weakness. Maybe, but I can sleep at night." Walker came over, his arm in a sling but his authority intact. "Marcus Thornton, you're under arrest for arson, attempted murder, fraud, and about a dozen other charges I'll think of once I'm not bleeding. Billy, you and the boys take him and his men to the jail. Guard them well." As they led Thornton away, the man looked back one last time. Not at Eli. At the clearing. At the Apache families who were already starting to rebuild, helping each other, sharing what little they had. Something flickered in Thornton's eyes. Not understanding. Never that. But maybe the barest recognition that he'd miscalculated. That he'd thought might made right when in reality community made right. Cooperation made right. People standing together made right. Then he was gone, and Eli could finally breathe. The aftermath took hours. Doc treated the wounded. Margaret helped organize shelter for those who'd lost their homes. Henry Wu took inventory of what was needed and promised to return with supplies. The townspeople who'd come to help stayed to help rebuild, raising new frames and stretching new canvas. Naiche worked alongside her people, her children's safety, allowing her to focus on healing others. Joseph Running Bear clasped her hand and spoke to her in Apache. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Later, when the worst was over and the settlement was beginning to resemble something livable again, Eli found himself sitting by a fire with Naiche. "Joseph says we are free," she said quietly. "With Thornton arrested, with witnesses, with proof, we can go home to our land, build our cabin, live." "That's good." "Yes, very good." She paused. "What will you do?" It was the question Eli had been avoiding. With the crisis over, with Naiche and her children safe, there was no reason for him to stay. He could go back to his cabin, back to his solitude, back to the safe, numb existence he'd built for 5 years. Except it didn't feel safe anymore. It felt empty. "I don't know," he admitted. "For 5 years I knew exactly what I was doing, hiding, punishing myself. Now," he looked at the fire, "now I don't know what comes next." Naiche was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When Taza died, I thought my life was over, thought I had nothing left but to survive for my children. But these days, I have learned something." "What?" "Life is not over when love ends. Life is only over when you stop letting love begin again." Eli looked at her, really looked at her, at the strength in her face, the wisdom in her eyes, the grace with which she carried grief and hope together. "Are you asking me something?" he said quietly. "I am saying when we build our cabin it will have room. For family, for friends, for anyone who needs a home." She met his gaze. "Door is open, like you opened door for us. Fair exchange." "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "No one is ready. We just decide to try anyway." She stood and brushed snow from her dress. "Think about it. You know where to find us." She walked away to check on her children, leaving Eli alone with his thoughts and the fire. Doc came and sat beside him. "Heard that conversation. Woman's got a point." "I know." "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know." "Well, figure it out soon. Life's too short to spend it being stupid." Doc handed him a flask. "To new beginnings. May we be brave enough to take them." They drank as the sun set over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold. Around them, people who'd been strangers were becoming friends. People who'd been enemies were becoming neighbors. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a lonely man was learning that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to stop running. The world was still hard, still dangerous, still full of men like Thornton who'd do anything for profit, but it was also full of people like Nietzsche and Margaret and Doc and Billy Crane, people who chose courage over comfort, people who stood up when standing was hard, and that Eli thought was worth sticking around for. Spring came to Arizona like a promise kept. The snow melted from the high country feeding streams that had run dry through the winter. Wildflowers emerged in impossible colors, painting the desert in purple and gold and crimson. The air warmed, carrying the smell of sage and juniper and new growth. Eli Brennan stood on a ridge overlooking the valley where Nietzsche's family land stretched out below. 3 months had passed since Thornton's arrest. 3 months of trials and testimony and legal proceedings that had finally mercifully concluded with justice served. Marcus Thornton was in the territorial prison awaiting transfer to a federal facility. His land deals had been exposed, his schemes unraveled. 6 other corrupt officials had gone down with him. The territorial governor himself had come to Flagstaff to apologize to Nietzsche and her family to ensure their land rights were not just recognized, but protected. It was as close to a happy ending as the real world allowed. From his vantage point, Eli could see the cabin taking shape. Not the small temporary shelter Nietzsche had planned, but something larger, something permanent. A real home with room for a family and maybe, just maybe, room for one more. He'd been helping with the construction for 2 months now. At first he told himself it was just until the frame was up, then until the roof was on, then until the windows were fitted. Each milestone became another excuse to stay 1 more week. Doc had called him on it last week. "You know you're not fooling anyone, right? Just move in already. Stop pretending you're going back to that lonely cabin." Eli had tried to protest, but Doc had just laughed and walked away. The truth was, he'd been back to his old cabin exactly once, to collect his belongings and close the door for the last time. The place had felt like a tomb, cold and silent and empty of everything that mattered. He'd stood in the doorway for a long minute saying goodbye to the man he'd been, the man who thought isolation was safety, the man who'd believed that running from pain was the same as healing from it. Then he'd locked the door, mounted his horse, and ridden away without looking back. Down in the valley he could see figures moving around the construction site. Kaya and 2 Apache boys his age were working on the corral fence, their young voices carrying in the clear air. Isti sat in the shade with Clara Whitmore, who'd made the 20-mile journey from Flagstaff twice a month to continue the girls' education. Chato played with Scout, the 2 of them inseparable now. And Nietzsche worked in the garden plot she'd staked out near the cabin. Even from this distance, Eli could see the careful rows, the irrigation channels, the methodical planning that went into every decision she made. He'd helped her plant that garden, had learned the Apache names for the crops, had listened to her explain the companion planting her mother had taught her. Working beside her in the dirt, he'd felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Peace. Not the empty quiet of isolation, but the deeper peace that came from purpose, from connection, from being part of something larger than your own guilt and grief. Scout barked a happy sound, and Eli saw Nietzsche look up toward the ridge. She couldn't possibly see him from that distance, but she waved anyway as if she knew exactly where he was. He waved back and started down the trail. By the time he reached the valley floor, Margaret O'Brien had arrived with a wagon full of supplies. She'd become a regular visitor, bringing goods from Flagstaff and news from town. The boarding house practically ran itself these days, she claimed, giving her time to meddle in other people's lives. "Eli Brennan," she called out when she saw him. "Just the man I needed. Help me unload these windows before my back gives out." The windows were for the 2nd story, which they'd decided to add at the last minute. More room for a growing family, Doc had said with a meaningful look at Eli and Nietzsche. They worked together in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes between people who've been through fire and come out the other side. When the windows were unloaded, Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and surveyed the cabin with satisfaction. "It's coming along beautifully. Should be finished by summer." Should be, Eli agreed. And then what? Then they move in, start their life here. Margaret raised an eyebrow. What about you? I'm helping build it. That's not what I asked. Eli didn't have a good answer. He and Nietzsche had fallen into a pattern over these months, working side by side during the day, sharing meals, talking in the evenings while the children played. It felt natural, comfortable, right? But neither of them had spoken about what came next, what it meant that he was here every day, what it meant that she smiled when she saw him, what it meant that the children called him Uncle Eli, and Chato had started asking when he was moving in for real. It's complicated, Eli said finally. It's only complicated if you make it complicated. Margaret patted his arm. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. Ask yourself this: where do you want to be? Here. Then be here. Stop overthinking it. She climbed back on her wagon and headed toward Flagstaff, leaving Eli standing in the yard, with her words echoing in his head. That evening, after the work was done and the children were fed, Eli and Nietzsche walked to the ridge together. It had become their habit this quiet time while the sun set and the valley filled with shadow. They sat on a fallen log watching the sky turn from blue to orange to deep purple. Scout lay at their feet, content. Margaret says the cabin should be finished by midsummer, Nietzsche said. Probably sooner if the weather holds. Yes, she paused. Joseph Running Bear came by today. You missed him. What did he want? To offer blessing. To perform ceremony when we move in. Apache tradition. It brings good spirits to a new home. That's good. He also asked about you. Eli looked at her. What about me? He asked if you were staying, if this was your home too. Nietzsche met his gaze. I did not know what to tell him. There it was. The question neither of them had directly asked in 3 months, laid out plain and simple under the fading light. Eli thought about the cabin he'd abandoned, about 5 years of self-imposed exile, about the night Nietzsche had knocked on his door and asked for warmth, about everything that had happened since. I've been thinking, he said slowly, about what home means. I used to think it was a place. The cabin where Sarah and I lived, the ranger station where I worked, specific buildings in specific towns. And now I think home is wherever the people you love are, wherever you're needed, wherever you can be yourself without pretending or hiding or running. He paused. This feels like home. Here. With you and the children. If you'll have me. Nietzsche was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. When Taza died, I thought that part of my life was over. Thought I would raise my children alone, be mother not woman, not wife. You don't have to be anything you don't want to be. I know. That is why I can say this. She took his hand. I want you here. Children want you here. We are better with you than without you. That is what family is. People who make each other better. Eli felt something unlock in his chest. Some final piece of armor he'd been carrying since Sarah died, since Talako hanged, since he'd decided the safest way to live was to live alone. I'm not perfect, he said. I made mistakes, big ones, and I'll probably make more. We all make mistakes. That is being human. What matters is what we do after. She squeezed his hand. You opened your door. You stood with us. You fought for us. That is who you are. That is the man I see. And that's enough. More than enough. They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, filling the sky with cold light. Scout's breathing was steady and peaceful. In the valley below, lamplight glowed in the windows of the half-finished cabin. So it's settled, Eli said. I stay. You stay. And we're family, partners, whatever we choose to be. Nietzsche smiled. We have time to figure it out. No rush. Just Together. Together, Eli repeated. He liked the sound of that word, the weight of it, the promise. They walked back down to the cabin as the moon rose silver and full. The children were already asleep, wrapped in blankets near the fire. Doc had stayed to keep watch, and he looked up when they entered. "About damn time," he said quietly. "Thought I'd have to lock you two in a room together." "Shut up, Doc," Eli said, but he was smiling. "Never. It's my best quality." The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt like the life Eli had lost and thought he'd never find again. Days filled with purpose. Mornings working on the cabin, watching it transform from frame to structure to home. Afternoons teaching Kaya to shoot properly, the boys' skills improving rapidly under patient instruction. Evenings with all of them gathered around the fire, sharing stories and food and laughter. Henry Wu came once a week with supplies, often staying for dinner. Clara Whitmore continued Isty's lessons, marveling at how quickly the girl learned. Billy Crane visited too, now a full deputy under Marshal Walker, proud of his badge and determined to use it honorably. Joseph Running Bear became a frequent presence, teaching Eli about Apache customs, about the land, about the delicate balance required to live in harmony with this harsh and beautiful country. The old man seemed pleased that Eli was staying, that Nietzsche had found someone to stand beside her. And slowly, week by week, the cabin took shape. Walls went up, a roof went on, floors were laid, windows were fitted. A porch was added wide enough for sitting in the evening, a loft for the children, 2 bedrooms on the ground floor. On a warm day in late June, they held the ceremony Joseph had promised. The whole community came. Apache families from neighboring settlements, townspeople from Flagstaff, Margaret and Doc and Henry and Clara and Marshal Walker and Billy Crane, even Reverend Stone, who stood respectfully to the side while Joseph performed the traditional blessing. There were songs in Apache and prayers in English and food enough for an army. Eli stood with Nietzsche and her children, feeling the weight of belonging, of being part of something larger than himself. Kaya stood tall and proud, nearly 12 now, already showing signs of the man he would become. Isty read a story she'd written about a family who found home after a long journey. Chato simply smiled and held Eli's hand. As the sun set and the celebration continued, Doc pulled Eli aside. "Got something for you." He handed Eli a letter. "Came to the boarding house last week. Took me a while to track you down." The letter was from the territorial governor's office. Eli opened it with curious hands. It was an official pardon for any role Eli might have played in Talako's wrongful conviction. A formal acknowledgement that he'd been deceived, that he'd acted in good faith, that he'd spent the years since trying to make amends. "You don't need it," Doc said quietly. "You've already forgiven yourself, but sometimes it helps to have it in writing." Eli stared at the paper. 5 years of guilt officially absolved. Not that it changed anything, really. He'd still made the mistake, still arrested an innocent man, still had to live with that knowledge, but maybe finally he could live with it without it defining him. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me, thank yourself. You did the hard work. I just delivered the mail." That night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep in their new home, Eli and Nietzsche sat on the porch. The cabin behind them was solid and real and full of life. The valley spread out before them, peaceful under the stars. "Are you happy?" Nietzsche asked. Eli thought about it. Happiness was a complicated thing. He still missed Sarah, still regretted Talako, still carried scars that would never fully heal. But sitting here in this place with this woman beside him and 3 children sleeping safely inside, he felt something he'd thought was lost forever. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm happy." "Good. Me too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen. Scout lay between them, a warm presence. From inside came the sound of Chato talking in his sleep, dreaming whatever dreams 5-year-olds dream. Eli thought about the journey that had brought him here. A knock on a door in a snowstorm, a decision to help strangers when help was needed, a choice to stand up when standing was hard, a gradual realization that running from pain doesn't heal it, but facing it with others might. "What are you thinking?" Nietzsche asked. "About how far we've come," he said, "from that night in the snow to here. Sometimes the best journeys are the ones we never planned." Nietzsche smiled. "Taza used to say the trail chooses the traveler as much as the traveler chooses the trail." "Smart man. He would have liked you very much." Nietzsche leaned her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other. That is what family does." "Yeah," Eli said softly. "I guess it is." In the distance a coyote called. Its mate answered. The sound echoed across the valley, wild and free, and somehow comforting. Life here would not be easy. There would be hard winters and dry summers and challenges they couldn't yet imagine. There would be people who didn't approve, who thought an Apache woman and a white man shouldn't build a life together. There would be grief and loss and the thousand small difficulties of any life. But they would face it together. Not alone anymore. Not isolated or hidden or running. Together. And that made all the difference. Eli looked up at the stars, those ancient points of light that had guided travelers since the beginning of time. He thought about Sarah, hoped she would understand, hoped she would approve of the man he'd become, the family he'd found. He thought about Talico, wished he could apologize one more time, wished he could explain that he'd tried to make amends by standing up when it mattered. And he thought about the future, about watching Kaya grow into a man, about teaching Isti to read and write and think for herself, about Chato's laughter, about building a life with Nietzsche day by day, choice by choice. It wasn't the life he'd planned, wasn't the life he'd expected. It was better. The door behind them opened. Chato stood there in his nightshirt, rubbing his eyes. "Papa Eli, I had bad dream." Eli stood and scooped the boy up. "It's okay. I'm here. You stay. Always." He carried Chato back inside, Nietzsche following. They tucked the boy into bed, Scout curling up beside him for extra comfort. Isti and Kaya slept peacefully in the loft above. Eli and Nietzsche stood in the doorway of the children's room watching over them. 3 children who'd lost their father, but found a family. 3 children who would grow up knowing they were loved and safe and home. "This is good," Nietzsche whispered. "Yes," Eli agreed. "This is good." They walked to their own room, the one they'd built together. Not his room or her room, but theirs. A space shared, a future chosen. As Eli lay down that night, surrounded by the sounds of family sleeping safely under a roof he'd helped build, he felt something he hadn't felt in 5 long years. Complete. Not because the pain was gone, not because the mistakes were erased, not because life was perfect, but because he'd finally learned the truth that Sarah had tried to teach him in those last fevered days. That love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms. It finds new expressions. It grows in unexpected places if you let it. That being alone doesn't make you safe, it just makes you alone. And that home isn't where you're from. It's where you choose to be. He'd chosen. And he was home. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The valley slept peacefully. And in a cabin built with hope and hard work and the shared belief that tomorrow could be better than today, a family rested. Not perfect, not without scars, not without memories of loss and pain, but together. And in the end, that was everything. The winter's mercy had led to spring's promise, and spring's promise had led to summer's fulfillment. A knock on a door in the snow, a choice to open it, and everything that followed. This was how lives changed, not with thunder and lightning, but with small acts of courage, with doors opened instead of closed, with hands extended instead of withdrawn, with hearts willing to risk love again despite knowing it could end. Eli Brennan had spent 5 years running from that risk. Now he embraced it. And in embracing it, he found what he'd been searching for all along. Not redemption from the past, though that came too. Not escape from pain, though that eased with time. but purpose, connection, family, home. The end.